show me one piece of evidence, one, that says she did this on purpose. Show it.
He said there is zero evidence. Zero. Not insufficient evidence. Not evidence that was misinterpreted. Zero evidence that his daughter deliberately drove a Toyota Camry into a brick wall at nearly 100 miles per hour on the morning of July 31st, 2022, killing Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Steve Shirilla said that on camera on a podcast that aired last week in an interview with Chris Cuomo that ran for nearly an hour and a half. He said it clearly, without hesitation, with the particular certainty of a man who has been repeating the same sentence long enough that it has stopped feeling like a position and started feeling like fact. A judge looked at the same case and found his daughter guilty on all counts. That is where this story begins. Not with the Netflix documentary, not with the appeal, not with the text messages or the jail calls or the disciplinary record at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. It begins with a father sitting across from a journalist and saying zero evidence, while the public record says something entirely different. And the gap between those two things is the story that Brian Entin has been following more closely than anyone else in American journalism since the day a judge in Cuyahoga County called Mackenzie Shirilla a person who had a mission, and that mission was death. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. Davion Flanagan was 19. Both of them were in that car on a summer morning. Both of them died. Dominic's sister, Christine Russo, has been one of the strongest, clearest voices in this case since the beginning. A young woman who has sat in front of cameras and told the truth about what she saw, what she knows, and what the last 4 years have done to the family she has left. And what Christine has said directly contradicts nearly every major claim Steve Shirilla made in that interview. Two versions of the same story. One from the father of the convicted, one from the sister of the victim. And criminologist Dr. Casey Jordan, one of the most respected behavioral analysts in the country, has been watching both of them and drawing conclusions that the public needs to hear. Before we go further, this is the question we want you to sit with right now. Before the analysis, before the details, you have been watching this case. You have seen the documentary. You have seen the footage and read the texts and heard from the experts. When Steve Shirilla looks at a camera and says zero evidence, does he believe that? Or is he saying it because saying anything else would be the end of the story he needs to tell about his daughter? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. This is the case ledger. If this is your first time here, we follow evidence. We don't protect powerful people. We don't move on until the case moves. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what comes next in this one. The Chris Cuomo interview is the most revealing thing Steve Shirilla has done publicly since the documentary aired. Not because of what he said. Most of it was consistent with positions the family has maintained for years, but because of how he said it. Because of the moments where Cuomo pushed back and Steve pushed back harder. Steve told Cuomo that Dominic and Mackenzie were never going to break up, that this was not a volatile relationship, that these kids fought and got back together. That was their thing, that they were talking about getting married. Christine Russo has said something completely different. She told Brian Entin directly. In an interview, Entin described as one of the most honest conversations he has had in 4 years of covering this case, that in the 6 months before the crash, the relationship had become extremely toxic. Her word, her assessment based on what she saw and what her brother told her, and what the text messages documented. She said Dominic had been trying to break up with Mackenzie steadily, and that he had big plans for his life that did not include staying in a relationship that had become something he needed to get out of. She also said something that has been reported but never fully absorbed by the public discussion of this case. She said Mackenzie had tried something similar 2 weeks before. that she was driving the car recklessly and screaming that she was going to kill him, that Dominic had to get out of the car on the side of the road and call someone to pick him up, that certain family members already knew about that incident. 2 weeks before July 31st, Dominic Russo had gotten out of a car Mackenzie Shirilla was driving and called someone to come get him. On July 31st, he did not get out. Steve Shirilla, when asked about the relationship being volatile, said that was a lie. That characterization was harsh, that they were never, ever, ever going to break up. The text messages that have been released publicly and that Fox 8 reported on as part of the new documents released by Strongsville police paint a picture that does not support the version Steve Shirilla is offering. They paint a picture of a relationship that was cycling through conflict at a pace and intensity that the people around it had started to notice. They paint a picture of someone who had told the person she was with that she would die for him, and had also sent messages saying she wanted to kill someone, and messages that prosecutors and the court found significant enough to enter into the record of a murder trial. Steve Shirilla told Cuomo that Mackenzie was not a bully, that she stuck up for herself, that she stuck up for her friends, period. Christine Russo said she could not stand Mackenzie from the first day she met her, that Mackenzie did not say hello, did not introduce herself, gave no one in the family any basic respect. That was how she was with everyone. Brian Entin has spent 4 years building sources on this case. He has spoken to people who went to school with Mackenzie in Strongsville. He has spoken to people who were incarcerated alongside her at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Across every one of those conversations, the description that emerges is consistent, and it is not the one Steve Shirilla delivered to Chris Cuomo last week. There is also the question of what happened in the hours immediately after the crash. Christine Russo told Entin that Mackenzie's mother called their family and told them Mackenzie was unconscious, that she was like a coma, that she had not woken up, that this went on for 3 or 4 days. The Russo family believing that the girl who had been driving the car that killed Dominic was herself fighting for her life. And then, Christine said, they found out that was not true. That within hours of the crash, Mackenzie had been on TikTok filming herself in the hospital bed. That she had been on Instagram with her mother, attempting to secure modeling opportunities. Hours after the crash, 2 young men were dead, and that was what was happening. Steve Shirilla's explanation for the marijuana use is the part of the interview that produced the most direct and immediate reaction from the people who watched it. Cuomo asked him about the widespread perception that the parents were too permissive, that they allowed things a parent should not have allowed. Steve's response was to say that he did not have a problem with the marijuana use, that it was a battle he would never win, that he could not lock her in her room, that there are so many factors. Chris Cuomo, to his credit, pushed back directly. He said the answer to every suggestion you just made is yes. That's what parents do. Taking the door off the room, taking the phone, grounding. Steve acknowledged he had done some of those things. But the fundamental position that the marijuana use was a battle not worth fighting, that he had made peace with it, is one that Dr. Casey Jordan found significant for specific reasons that go beyond parenting philosophy. Dr. Casey Jordan is a criminologist who has been analyzing this case publicly since before the Netflix documentary. She appeared on Brian Entin's program and delivered an assessment of the Shirilla family dynamic that is worth understanding carefully. She described what she called an enmeshed dynamic between Mackenzie and her mother, Natalie, a relationship she said had crossed into what behavioral professionals describe as emotional incest, not sexual, a term that refers to a parent who has stopped functioning as a parent and has become more like a peer, living vicariously through their child, losing the perspective that parenting requires. She said Natalie appeared to be Mackenzie's #1 fan rather than her mother. that the victim impact statement at the sentencing, in which Natalie spoke almost entirely about her own family's suffering with very little acknowledgement of the Russo and Flanagan families, was consistent with someone who had fully substituted her daughter's identity for her own. Jordan also addressed the marijuana issue directly and specifically. She noted that the father's stated indifference to marijuana use is not just a parenting choice. It is a statement about what was being modeled and allowed in that household for a teenager whose brain was still developing. She said Mackenzie had been a runaway train since puberty, and that the parents had not so much raised her as watched her set her own course while they accommodated the direction she was already headed. The jail calls. The ones Entin and others have described as strange, as having an unusual quality, as featuring a secret language between Mackenzie and her mother. Jordan's analysis of those calls was specific. She described the dynamic she observed as Mackenzie being the puppet master and Natalie being the puppet, that in the relationship between them, the daughter was pulling the strings, that the mother, who was supposed to be the adult, had regressed into something more like a teenager herself when she talked to Mackenzie, developing a coded language that Jordan said reminded her of the Casey Anthony jailhouse calls. A mother so enmeshed in her daughter's identity that she could no longer see clearly what her daughter had done or what the appropriate response to it was. And then there is what Chris Cuomo said about the legal strategy, which is separate from everything else, but may ultimately be the most consequential piece of this discussion. Cuomo said on Entin's program that he believes Mackenzie Shirilla received ineffective counsel in two specific and significant ways. The first was the decision to pursue a bench trial instead of a jury trial. Bench trials, trials decided by a single judge with no jury. Com. They work best in highly technical cases where a judge is better equipped than a jury of ordinary citizens to evaluate complex data. Cuomo's argument is that this case was never going to be won on the data. The data, the event data recorder, the speed, the absence of braking, the steering input, was always going to tell a damaging story. The case for the defense lived in the question of intent, and a jury of 12 people, at least some of whom had experience with substance use, might have been more receptive to an argument about impaired judgment than a judge who was going to look at the data and make a technical determination. The second failure Cuomo identified was the complete absence of a diminished capacity argument. He said the defense should never have left that on the table, that the combination of THC in Mackenzie's system, which he argued could have been presented as being at a level that significantly impaired her judgment and her ability to understand what she was doing, and the POTS diagnosis that the family has raised, gave the defense an argument about mental state at the time of the offense that they never fully developed. That if you believe, as Cuomo said he does, that Mackenzie was not suicidal, that a person would have to be suicidal to consciously choose to drive into a wall at that speed, then the question of why she did it has never been properly answered. And the defense never gave the court an alternative framework for understanding her mental state that could have competed with the prosecution's intent narrative. Cuomo was clear that he does not know why she did what she did. He does not know if the POTS explanation is accurate. He does not think the bench trial decision and the failure to argue diminished capacity make Mackenzie innocent. He thinks they may have cost her a fair shot at a different outcome. Steve Shirilla agrees with that assessment and has said so publicly. The lawyer's decisions are something he returns to repeatedly. They are the grievance he carries most visibly. What he does not carry visibly, what was almost entirely absent from an hour and a half of interview time with Chris Cuomo, was grief for Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Entin noticed it. He said he went to sleep bothered by it. That Steve did not acknowledge the victims until partway through, and when he did, It felt like an obligation rather than a need. That is not a small thing. That is the entire shape of what this family has been communicating for 4 years. Christine Russo noticed it too. She is not bothered in the abstract. She is bothered in the specific, ongoing, daily way of someone who lost her brother and has spent 4 years watching a family tell the world that the person responsible for his death is a victim. She told Entin that her family is terrible, that her parents are changed, that the grief has not gotten easier, that it has gotten worse, that almost 4 years in, she is more damaged by it than she was when it happened, that at every family event, at every birthday, at every holiday, there is a hole where Dominic should be and a question in the room about whether to bring him up and risk making someone cry. That is what Steve Shirilla did not say in an hour and a half. That is what Christine Russo said in 2 minutes. 2 young men are dead. One family is fighting for a convicted murderer's release. Another family is trying to survive the absence of a 20-year-old who had big plans and a life he was building, and a sister who still has not figured out how to carry what July 31st, 2022 left her with. Dominic Russo, 20 years old. He had been trying to build something, crypto, finances, a future that Christine described as having real direction. He was clever, she said. He had plans. He had been trying to get out of a relationship that had become something he no longer recognized. He did not make it out. Davian Flanagan, 19 years old. He had been adopted as a child, had been a starting running back at Strongsville High School, had been working full-time and planning to start cosmetology school in the fall of 2023. He had nothing to do with whatever was happening between Mackenzie and Dominic. He was in the car because he was their friend. He died because of where he was sitting. Their names belong in this story. They belong at the center of it. Whatever legal arguments are still being made, whatever appeals are still being filed, whatever interviews Steve Shirilla and Natalie Shirilla give to whoever will have them, those 2 names are the reason any of this matters. And the black box in that car recorded what happened. It did not record 0 evidence.